Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching another episode of the Weaviate podcast. I'm super excited to welcome Patrice Bourgougnon to the podcast. Patrice is one of the most active open source contributors to Weaviate, filing issues, poking it apart, seeing the new updates. And so I'm so excited to chat with Patrice. Quickly, Patrice, I remember you gave this feedback when Ref to Vec first came out, and that really meant a lot to me. And so just all these contributions, like really, it's just so awesome to see. I expect this to be such a deep conversation into what you're building and the miscellaneous features of Weaviate and your perspective on it. So firstly, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Connor. I'm very happy to be in your podcast. I'm following you for quite a long time now.
Yeah, it is funny. I feel like I've known you for a while, just through GitHub and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And so, could we kind of start the podcast with, like to set the stage for our listeners, like what are you building?
So I'm a developer for a long time now, and I'm building a plugin, an extension for WordPress, and more specifically WooCommerce, but it works for naked WordPress too. And the idea is to have a better search in WordPress than the standard MySQL search, which is, I think it's not even full text search. So there are plenty of plugins, and the specificity of WPSolr, which is the plugin, is to use external search engines to power the search for many reasons: performance, uh, capabilities, features, tunability, and so on and so on.
Hmm. Yeah, it's super cool. I think like yeah, like WordPress. I remember like back early days when I was learning about almost like the internet to say with WordPress, like how WordPress helps you set up this website and that kind of integration of like semantic search and advanced AI tools into WordPress. It all sounds so interesting. Can you maybe tell me about like like how's the business of running that kind of thing? Like what are sort of the nuances of that market?
You mean for AI? AI search?
Yeah, I guess just it must be an interesting. It's kind of like no code. Like, can you tell me a little more about like how you kind of would the experience of this kind of like building AI into something like WordPress?
Yes. So WordPress, it's something a little bit specific compared to headless solutions now, no code solution, and so on, because you can have both of worlds. You can be fully no code, but you have access to its open source, and you install it on your server or on a hosted service, and you can access the full code, and you can modify the not the core of WordPress, obviously, because if you update the core on next release, you lose your code. But you can create what is named a plugin, an extension that you push, you upload on your server, and it does really whatever you want. That's why I love WordPress as a developer, because you can go for no code or for full code, completely something completely custom. So in terms of a market, for small businesses, they tend to use on the shelf plugins with minimal configurations, and but it's an addiction. So many WordPress owners and with 100 plugin in their in their website, and it can be a problem for interoperability between the plugins. So you install one, it breaks another one, and so on. Compatibility with WordPress versions. So there's a trade-off installing only the ones that you need. But it's difficult because you have thousands of plugins available. More specifically for such plugins, you have plugins which are working with WordPress inside WordPress only. So extending WordPress, but stay inside WordPress, installing nothing specific. So continuing to work with MySQL as a search engine. And other plugins which are using like mine, which are using external solutions that can be self-hosted or hosted on a SaaS service elsewhere.
So are these like I remember when I first saw like WordPress plugins, you have like PHP. What kind of like languages are you using to connect Weaviate and WordPress plugins?
PHP. That's something which is kind of a limitation. Today, the market is Pythonic for AI, and so everything is Python. So that's probably a good reason why I chose Weaviate 2 years ago when I started evaluating the market and the features, performance, and so on. Because if you don't have the embedders, the vectorizers inside your vector database, you'll have to produce somehow the vectors from the data you have in WordPress or WooCommerce. So you will have to send the title, description, attributes like price, colors, sizes for WooCommerce, and create a vector, get back the vector, and send it to the vector database like Weaviate or another one. And vectorization is almost 100% made from Python clients. Using Python in WordPress, I don't think it's really possible. In fact, so there are two solutions: either with a PHP client, which doesn't exist for Weaviate, or if you have the chance or malchance to be a developer, you can do it because Weaviate provides two APIs, which is very specific. One is a REST API to do everything for managing Weaviate and, for instance, uploading your data to Vectorize. But you have also a GraphQL API to do the search thing. So searching with vectors, filtering, aggregating, and so on. But it's also a kind of REST API, in fact. So in a way, I had to create my own PHP client inside WordPress, calling the REST APIs of Weaviate. It's not a clean PHP client, so it can be open sourced and so on, because it's really difficult to build a real one with and take the responsibility to maintain it. And let's say it's a kind of mini version of a PHP client.
Yeah, that topic in Weaviate always fascinates me. Like all the different clients. Like a recent podcast we had Andre, who's building LangChain Ruby. Like kind of like building all these tools native to Ruby. Like we have when we were doing the integration with Microsoft Semantic Kernel, we were then building like for C#.
C#.
Yeah, like TypeScript. Yeah, there's so
yes.
yeah.
Nowadays, a big subject for is replacing, keeping the Pythonic API interfaces, but replacing with something behind the scene with something faster, like Rust, for instance. So I think Panda 2 is Rust or something like that. And the thing, yes, multi-language is a big topic. Usually, it's done with client builders like OpenAPI and YAML file and so on. But currently, as far as I know, yes, for Weaviate, it's Python, and that's it. So.
Yeah, I think.
But it's not a big deal. In fact, if you don't have to implement the whole REST API of Weaviate, you just have to concentrate on a few features, and that's enough. In fact.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
to be honest, PHP is mostly nowadays. I could make enemies here, but it's mostly about WordPress, Drupal, CMS. Apart from projects for big companies which are producing the full stack in PHP, like Symfony, for instance, or Laravel. So probably in the future there will be less PHP clients I don't think there will be much more than today.
Yeah, but I have one more kind of technical question on how you're building with Weaviate before we get into higher level topics about just the broad space. But like, I'm curious about how you're using these like inference containers. Like, you have Weaviate, and then you also have like the text to vec clip and so on. Like, how are you thinking about managing those two services, like the database and then the inference containers?
It's simple. I don't. I delegate that to Weaviate. So in Weaviate, you have indeed the stateless and the stateful part, and the stateful is it's a pure black box at my level. So it's in Go, and I don't even know how it works. So storing vectors, ANN algorithm, and so on. But let's say you're in WPSolr now in the WordPress administration. So you selected your search engine type, so Weaviate, and then you have several choices. So you have a drop-down list of vectorizers. So you can select all. Currently, I think all the vectorizers available. Not all for we can discuss about that for because I don't right now I don't do image similarity. So I do text to image, but not image to text or image to image. So you select, let's say, text to vec, clip, OpenAI, Cohere, and now Google PEM 2. And the only thing I do from the plugin, from the PHP code, in fact, is calling the REST API of Weaviate and creating a new class, a class in Weaviate being the equivalent of a table, let's say in MySQL. And the parameters that are sent with this class creation are some default fields, field types, and the vectorizer, and a few parameters depending on the vectorizer you have chosen. For instance, if you choose the clip vectorizer, you have to choose, for instance, the percentage of search in text or in images. If you choose the hybrid vectorizer, no, hybrid it's in GraphQL. That's another question. But so parameters depends on the vectorizer you've chosen in WPSolr. But that's what's a bit magic here. You have to think a little bit before, because you need, okay, I need a clip, for instance. I want to use Docker. I want to install Docker somewhere, perhaps on the same server as WordPress. So you have to produce your Docker Weaviate file with the vector with the clip model configured. So you go to Weaviate, to the Weaviate site. There's a nice wizard to produce all the configuration possible, including the clip. And then you download the Docker file and you modify it if necessary, and you launch it. So that's the only thing which is a bit not completely integrated, because there's no way to go further, in fact. So launching the right Docker with the right vectorizer, and after that you choose the same vectorizer in WPSolr, and everything is done automatically on the class definition. That's it. You can, rather than installing Docker, you can install Kubernetes, and the description and configuration made on Weaviate site is great. So I'm not at all a specialist of Kubernetes, and I could manage to install it for my demos and for some customers also. And it's pretty great, and Kubernetes is great.
Yeah, well, at first, I just would like to say that I'm not much of a cloud expert myself. I've been around Weaviate enough to know a bit of these things, and so luckily I have Patrice here to. But like, I remember like when I was early, I was like doing consulting, and I had like a website that I hosted on GoDaddy, and so I just had like connected, like I had just like put my Stripe thing in JavaScript right on the website. So is that kind of similar to how you can install Docker and run the Weaviate containers?
No, because so when you for WordPress you have several options. You have options where the server is completely invisible to you. So you go to a site like you said, a GoDaddy or similar hosting providers, and you just click on a button that says create a new WordPress for me. A little bit of parameters, but that's it. And after that, you never have access to your WordPress server, or perhaps you will have access to the file system of WordPress, but only with FTP. So no SSH access, no remote access, nothing. So you can't install anything. And that's 99.9% of WordPress owners today. Another possibility that, in fact, you are installing it on a dedicated virtual machine, and then potentially you could have some access to the machine and install your Docker, for instance, or even a small Kubernetes mono cluster or two node clusters on it. But in general, you will have to install your Weaviate outside of your WordPress service or server. It could be on the same hosting provider. For instance, you've done that for WordPress, and then you rent host and you install your Docker, or you create on the same hosting provider or another one, you create your cluster service like Google Cloud or Amazon or Microsoft or any other Linode and so on and so on.
Yeah, I mean, like one more, it's kind of hopefully not too broad and like rhetorical, but like this kind of like, Weaviate's open sourcing of these Docker images as well as like the Kubernetes Helm charts. How has that kind of impacted your development experience with Weaviate?
It's pretty standard for me. In fact, currently WPSolr can connect to 5 or 6 search engines, and most of them are open source.
Mm-hmm.
Elasticsearch, Apache Solar, OpenSearch now, which is a fork of Elasticsearch. And after they are closed, the such service which are SaaS services. So that's pretty similar. Installing Weaviate is like installing. There's a small difference indeed. In fact, it's exactly the same, but it's different because there are no currently, as far as I know, there are no hosting companies providing Weaviate as a service, except Weaviate himself with his Weaviate cluster service. So in general, what I'm used to is, for, let's say, Elasticsearch, I'm going to a hosting service like elastic.co, like Bonsai. There's plenty of them. And that's the same principle as WordPress. That means it's you click, you select, okay, I want this number of RAM, I want the size of disk, and so on. And from there, you have a dashboard, and you have a token, and from this token, you enter it in WPSolr, and it's connected. So that would be exactly the same process, apart from the fact that currently it can be done, to my knowledge, only on Weaviate hosting services. So for some customers, I used to install a Kubernetes cluster for Weaviate. Alors, especially because, for instance, a customer needed the clip model. And if I remember, the clip model is not part of the hosting package of Weaviate. So anyway, I would have had even if I was hosted at Weaviate, I would have had to install it, but it's possible to do both. You can start with Weaviate cluster services, which is great because it's very easy to set up. You don't have to set it up, in fact. Same as for WordPress, you go to there to you register, you click on a button, it creates a cluster service, you get the token, and you put this token in WPSolr with your user password. I think before it was user password, now it's a token, if I remember. It's 2 years ago, so it looks like a dinosaur now. So yes, Weaviate has now plenty of authentication schemes. So you choose the one you want, and after that you say, I want, for instance, an OpenAI vectorizer, and that's it. You do it, and then you send your data from WPSolr and so on. But if you need something different, for instance, you have trained. So that's another market. Let's say you have trained a vectorizer model, a sentence transformer model. I don't know who would be able to do that, but it's possible. Then you would need to use this model, and you would have to install your Kubernetes cluster probably, and upload your models and so on.
Yeah, let's. So we're going to come back into this kind of like your own model, but I think just the story that we're going to transition topics now, but like this, I love this story. This like I don't claim to be an expert in this. I'm just kind of following along with the Weaviate story and learning from like an interest in vector search and seeing how the market's playing out. But you have like this, Weaviate and these big vector database companies building out this like cloud service platform on like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, like a big, cloud services. And, there's engineering teams that build this, but then you also have this open sourcing of like Kubernetes Helm charts and Docker images, and then you have this market emerges that I see it as it's kind of like consulting, but then there's even so much opportunity in the cloud and finding niches of how people want to run it that it even becomes almost like SaaS, like layers of SaaS. I see, and so I don't know. Yeah,
it's you that's a great thing, or not, because it's opinionated. People prefer to be opinionated. People prefer not to be opinionated. So, it's easier when you have no choice. You have no choice. Okay, it will be fine because that's my only choice. And that's typically the small business market. With the small business market, typically one owner for WooCommerce shop. The idea of installing Weaviate anywhere, and it doesn't have any idea what is Weaviate. It doesn't have any idea what is vector search. What is interesting in is AI search, because AI search is marketing, and so AI it's a synonym for magic, in fact. So all what you couldn't do before, you will be able to do it. That's the magic. It's kind of magic, but it's not completely magic. So it can be a little bit deceiving. But there are things which are pretty magic. So for this kind of customers, they must have something much easier. And but even if they have these guys that have chosen to go to AI search and go to an external search engine and so on, even them are a little bit different from the very average WordPress or WooCommerce user, I guess, wouldn't dare to go these very muddy roads, and so they would prefer the search plugin I mentioned before, which stay in WordPress, use MySQL, but nothing outside, nothing to configure, and which is fine. It's only when they reach the problems that they really need these kind of solutions. In general, they come to WPSolr or similar solutions for two reasons. One is performance. So if you have 500,000 products in your WooCommerce catalog, your search will die, because full text search with filters, with aggregation for faceting and so on, pagination, sorting, and so on. That's not possible with a standard technology. Okay, you can scale up your machine and so on, but if you have a little bit, it will be fine with 2 or 3 concurrent users. But if at the same time you have plenty of visitors, Black Friday things and so on, you're absolutely dead, because these kind of things cannot really be cached. People often think that they will scale because you are caching, but with search, it's very difficult to cache because there are so many parameters. It's not the same keywords, it's not the same filters, it's not the same aggregations, it's not the same page, so pagination, it's not the same sort. So you can't cache because you would need a database of terabytes. So yes, there are really several markets, and so the very small ones, they stay inside WordPress for their search. Some who have some issues, and so I mentioned the first issue, performance, but there's also the other one, which is quality, in fact. And quality is that's a full topic, because how do you know what is quality? That especially with vector search. How do you qualify what is good? Because everything can be everything can be retrieved. So that's and the benchmarks, we discussed about that earlier. But the benchmarks are sometimes not more for the keyword search than for vector search. So how do you compare these kind of benchmarks and so on? So, but they know that it can be better because, for instance, they detected they had plenty of such results with no results on their site. An example coming from my demos, as soon as I installed Weaviate on my demos, I wanted to test some crazy ideas, like so on the 2,000 products WooCommerce demo, I tried things like something to sleep on. Obviously, if you try that with keyword search, you have no results. If you try in cross languages also, so you have a shop in English. If it's in English, it's not too bad, because people will try to search in English. Let's say you have WooCommerce in France, but you'd like to benefit from customers all over the world. So you can't ask your customers to, and your site is in French. You don't want to translate it. You have to, let's say you have 100,000 products. You can't translate them. So you don't want to require your future clients to search in French. So what you need is cross-language search, and that's the magic part of vector search, for instance. The fact that the models have been trained, like coerce models, on 100 plus languages, that means instantly you open to the whole world without doing anything. That's a bit crazy, in fact, when you think about it. You didn't translate your site. You didn't do anything specific. You didn't create several indexes with several tunings for the lemmaizers, the stemmers, the synonyms, and so on. It's done for you. So that the trade-off is that it's very difficult to measure in terms of quality, because models are very imaginative. So the examples I gave you, I tested. I was so happy of the results. I've put them on my homepage. So some screenshots. So something to sleep on. Obviously, except in one case, first result was matrices, and for the sentence transformer from a GIN face, quite basic. It was a second result, not so bad. But for the others, that was the first result, no problem at all. And for I tested two cross languages, and that's quite amazing. In fact, you have your catalog in English, and I tested in Chinese. I don't speak Chinese, so I use first a translator, which is an AI too, to translate my query and use it after that. Chinese, I tested French, obviously, Spanish, and it works. So it works. It works. So it's difficult to say. Of course, you're just testing the tip of the iceberg. So does it work so well for all your corpus and so on? That's I don't know if it's even possible, but it works. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, I think it was. I think a really great transition from into this kind of search engine stuff and like all the models and this emergence of like zero shot models, and how it's really crazy to me, like kind of studying machine learning, seeing how like machine learning models are now just being like plugged into applications. I mean, this trend, we've been like covering it quite heavily, I think, with Weaviate, but
yes, the LLMs have become a commodity. That's something which nobody could forecast 2 years ago, even 1 year ago, probably. And it's speeding up. You see, all that companies who are now providing the frameworks to build your own and train your own big language models, like Mosaic ML, for instance, and or frameworks like Array and distributed computing and so on. So the issue is, of course, that remains technical and that remains very costly. But when you compare what we were reading, especially, I guess, for you, because that's your topic, what is ML? 3 years ago, ML, that was, okay, first linear regression, then things very simple, in fact. And today we are talking about NLP, about decision transformers, the clip models, and these models which have become commodity and now are delivered to you through APIs or through, thanks to Hugging Face and others, through downloads. And you can install them through a token and an API in Weaviate, or through the Docker model, let's say, the Docker model in Weaviate in your Kubernetes. That's nobody could have imagined that. Even Weaviate 2 years ago, I guess. I remember the first models of Weaviate were that was just before the transformers. Weaviate had its own models. I don't remember the names, but in 4 or 5 languages. And that was impressive, because that means that they created them by themselves and so on. And just after that, yes, the community arrived with transformers, thanks to a better computability, parallelism, and the big techs who entered the dance. And now, yes, you can consume them. I'm surprised when I'm on my Weaviate cluster, and at each new until now, at each new version of Weaviate, I just updated my configuration of Kubernetes to update to the latest version of Weaviate, and activate a new feature, like, for instance, recently the Palm 2 API embedder, the re-ranker now, re-ranker with Cohere or re-ranker with transformer models. And it seems that every week I can activate something new. That's almost surreal. It's a bit too good to be true, in fact. There must be some trade-off somewhere, but we'll find them later, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think like just like with like the quality of deep learning models is accelerating so fast. It's just like you said, it's almost unbelievable. Like I think the time of recording this podcast, we now have the Llama 2 open source language model. They're claiming that's I personally haven't had the chance yet to query it a little bit, but like just from MPT 30 billion like this. Now we've got Cloud 100K getting stronger.
And everything is. It seems that, but that's history. Everything is going to open source now. So we had models which were closed and behind an API. After that, we had models which were available, downloadable, but with some compromise on the open source version. Okay, it's open source, but not commercial and so on. It seems now that I think Llama 2 is commercial now. Perhaps not fully, but at least partially. And it seems that everything is going there.
Yeah, I think I listened to Bob recently was at Arthur speaking with Harrison Chase from LangChain and a couple other people and but like Bob had this new thing where he's talking about how you need to make the models stateful, and I think this is really interesting about like retrieval augmented generation and like Bob compared like model weights to like MP3 files and like with music and saying that like if you just distribute it, there's no like value capture compared to kind of this newer generation of like the value capture is in making it stateful. And it looks like with retrieval augmented generation, like I think that's a really strong argument for how you would do that.
Yes, that's something which is interesting because here we'll talk about a thing which is I understood recently, which was a bit strange for me compared to my experience, but it's a human experience. So humans are mostly wrong, in fact. So you have just a teeny row of vision, and you don't see what is the full spectrum. But most we discussed about that, and most benchmark show and are still showing that BM25, so keyword search, is still in competition with large language models, or any model, in fact, on a general corpus, of course. And in fact, it's even better on the specialized corpus. So for me, that was difficult to understand, and I guess for all the people who are either not interested at all by what is behind vector search, or not really technical, are not reading papers and so on. That because when I first try my demos with things like that, something to sleep on, obviously that it tilted as okay, that's far greater than the BM25, which is a standard for all such engines now. But it's not. If you produce a real benchmark with a lot of data and on different areas and so on, BM25 is still very good. So that comes to your question about the RAG and so on. It's the fine tuning. So the fact that you're able to adapt, in fact, your model to something specific that could be at several levels. It could be okay. We'll specialize it for medical, for e-commerce, for instance. I will or it could be even more specific. I will adapt it to my website. In fact, I don't know if in a website there's something so specific as products which have never been seen anywhere else during training of any large language models. But so fine tuning was the first idea. So fine-tuning is unfreezing or some few levels of at the beginning or at the end, and retrain a little bit with a few shots and so on. But with RAG, in fact, it's a prompt engineering, but rather than injecting your prompt from your human brain, in fact, you're injecting prompts from your database. But what was missing until recently was vector search. Because you have a question, you want to retrieve some data for some products, for instance. Let's say that you want to use RAG for producing recipes. So you have a site with plenty of WooCommerce was plenty of food, vegetables, meat, anything, and someone is looking for some kind of pasta, and you want to produce some recipes. So you have to, from the query, you have to retrieve your products. But then with your products, you will send it to an LLM to build your recipes or anything else. So generative AI. The problem is if you don't have a vector search which is intelligent enough to retrieve the right products, with what we said, fish can be named by many names. So let's say you name a specific fish, you don't have it in your site with a traditional search, unless you have a long list, thousands or tens of thousands of synonyms. For instance, the names in Latin, for instance, of all the fish in the world. Let's say those 10,000 Latin names are equal to fish. Okay, that's only for fish. So you have to do the same thing for the mushrooms. There are probably thousands, and so on and so on. Whereas you can expect from on-the-shelf BEncoder, which is used by, for instance, by Weaviate, you will be able to retrieve, with the name of a fish, you will be able to retrieve another fish that you have in stock, for instance, currently, and you can extract that and put it in your prompt for generating your recipe, for instance. And so both are required, in fact. But both are the same, the two faces of the same coin, because behind the scenes we have a model, we have BERT, we have GPT, we have these kinds of transformers, in fact, and they are really converging now. To be honest, until now, didn't. So Weaviate provides 3 generative models, 3 generative APIs, not model, but 3 generative readers, I think is the name. I didn't have usage right now. I had a customer interested in the recipes and so on, but it's not obvious to go from the idea to start, in fact. So the recipes could be a good point, but I'm sure users will have plenty of ideas. And if we are talking about that, but the next trend too, and perhaps that's the future of search boxes are chatbots. The first search box on a website just returning a list of results. An advanced search box is you have a list of suggestions that appears more or less complicated, intelligent. For instance, proposing a list of similar keywords or similar results and so on. But you can imagine to replace that by a chatbot. So instead of having a dummy search box with dummy suggestions, you could have something, not a chat box, something kind of hybrid. And a chat box, it's a RAG. It's with a workflow, of course, So you mentioned long chain. It can be lemma index and so on. But the idea is the same, and that could be interesting. Yes. What is interesting is that you could have different sort boxes on your pages, and one for recipes, for instance. And WPSolr can do that very easily. So you can have several configurations available. You could, for instance, create an index with a clip search and one with an OpenAI search and one with a sentence transformer from Hugging Face, and mix it with the different generative AI APIs provided by or models provided by Weaviate, and mix and match, for instance. So a query vectorizer with a Palm 2 generative result for the recipe, or the opposite, or there are so many possibilities now, and the list goes on. So in one part of your site, you will have this search box about recipes, and another part will be another search box about traveling, for instance. Because the problem with chatbox is it has to be super intelligent. You have only one interface for everything. So usually what is done is that you create intents. So you define intents in your chatbot. One is for a recipe. So you define a list of sentences that makes the intent. If he's talking about fish, it's probably.
Hey everyone, really sorry about that. We had a connection crash, unfortunately. Yeah, so Patrice, you just taught me a ton of things. I have so many notes written down with sort of different topics that we were going through. I mean, I guess I don't want to like I think we're recently talking about like search boxes and kind of the user interfaces and how that's innovating. You know, things like type ahead search, where you propose a query as you're searching, and or interfaces to propose multiple queries. All this is just really fascinating. I think. Yeah, I think there's a company called Vercel that's building like a lot of UIs that people plug in with these kind of tools. It's definitely an emerging space. There was one thing that and then we talked about like retrieval augmented generation tooling and fine tuning, but there is one idea in there that I think is really fascinating. Very early is we were talking about like BM25 being a strong baseline compared to vector search. And I think there's a new argument around that I think is really interesting is like right now when we think about retrieval augmented generation, we're thinking about searching, finding text, putting that text in the input, and then just that input goes to the transformer. But the next generation of these transformers, I think you're going to take the search results and you're going to put them in the middle of the transformer. So say layer 8 out of 12 is where you inject embeddings. And so in this sense, it's like embeddings are truly kind of, I think that's just a huge argument for vector embeddings particularly.
That's like the encoder-decoder scheme, in fact, where you have the encoders, the vectors of the encoder that go in the middle of somewhere, if I remember, of the decoder GPT model. Oh, yeah. I'm sure people will not stay at this level, and will try to overcome those limitations. And that it was more that when I read it was a video, I think, from MetaRank. They had it was a great video presentation at Berlin Buzz, if I remember, and they had plenty of benchmarks they made with their tooling, and they've tried everything. If I BM25 alone, B encoder alone, B encoder plus cross encoder, different type of cross encoding, hybrid mode, and so on and so on. And with the big tests with hundreds of thousands of predefined tests, it was better, but not so much, in fact. So when you looked at the slides, you couldn't believe it that how much effort you had to put on your vector search compared to the few percentage you could gain, and that was a bit surprising. But after all, BM25 has been made for that, has been tuned for 20 years, so we're just at the beginning for vector search and the next generation. And hybrid mode, as you said, there will be other hybrid modes we can't even imagine quantitative engine now. That's another part interesting, which is re-ranking, for instance. That's a big trend, I guess, now. So we yet just enter the dance with two ways of re-ranking, and which are implemented now in WPSolr. And it was pretty good, in fact. And the very interesting thing is that the cross encoder, which is the second part, is not very expensive when as a second phaser. You just have to re-rank 10 a few results, and surprisingly, it's almost you don't feel the lapse. It's as fast as it was. So the difficulty being the same, that means how do you evaluate, in fact, your results apart from a few tests you make manually. You are a WooCommerce owner, so you know what are your big queries. So you immediately you test you test them because they are your best sellers. So you test immediately that, okay, if only one of the 10 of your best sellers is not good, I don't want that. That's the test basically for small business to mid business, and that's also an interesting subject because if I remember your podcast. Mostly it's about something which is people who you were talking about with. It's about custom solutions, so more high-end market, which is completely different from the small business. So for this kind of market high-end, there's no question because they have all the infrastructure, all the resources, money, and people, and consultants, and even they probably they hire people from Weaviate, from the AI community, and experts on beyond color, cross color, and so on. But that's not a question at all with WordPress and WooCommerce. It could be because there are very big sites, biggest in the world, which are WordPress or WooCommerce. So even if it's WooCommerce or WordPress, they don't really care about it's not an issue for them. I mean, for the self owners and so on. So in that sense, it's a bit a new subject, I guess, for Weaviate. And I don't know what is the level currently of democratization of vector search. I know on my side people are interested, but it's always with some. Is it not too difficult? But it's the same thing as with Elasticsearch a few years ago, for instance. Now a lot of agencies, for instance, so agencies are very used to use Elasticsearch and Apache Solr, for instance. Less for hosting vector databases or installing and so on. So they have to redo the things, retrain, and rebuild a new service, in fact, from scratch. There are some similarities, but I don't think you can test, for instance, if they had some benchmarks or some tooling for verifying that, for instance, you didn't introduce a regression when you modified a parameter or several parameters in Elasticsearch, for instance, with learning to rank, or modify the two parameters in BM25, for instance. They have some tooling for that. Because as I said, you don't want, for instance, your test 10 best results disappear completely from your search for a shop. So probably it will be a new kind of tools. I'm not sure I've seen them until now. The tools, for instance, to do A/B testing, for instance. How do you do A/B testing? You have Elasticsearch and you want to compare to Weaviate. I had to do that with some customers, and as I told you, the test was very simple. I remember one owner was able to produce a long list of Excel with queries, and he took them one by one and compared in several search boxes, and this model compared to this model, because even with Weaviate, he compared several vectorizers. And he chose one, but it was really something on the head of the search, not on the tail. So for the tail, I don't know how tests can be done, but the most sensitive is the head. If you modify something and your head disappears, your shop loses 30% of the sales. So that's important. So tooling is something that I'm not aware until now for A/B testing or testing. Or probably be a trade-off thing that will appear in the next future when agencies will be more familiar with the. I think they are familiar, but I'm not sure they are. At least for mid-market, but not small. But for mid-market, I'm not sure agencies are really ready now to use vector search completely for these reasons. For instance, how can you guarantee owner that he will not suffer from the new search? For instance, that's difficult to evaluate.
Yeah, I think the big theme here is like vector databases versus search engines, and like when you hear vector databases, you might think that we just mean vector index plus database cloud, that kind of thing. But Weaviate also cares enormously about this search engine kind of part of it as well. And like I'm so happy to hear that you're liking the re-rankers and you're getting use out of it. And we've had all these great conversations. Mentioned Roman for MetaRank doing incredible work, and
Yep. I think there are currently only two vector searches available to do ranking and re-ranking and eventually re-ranking and so on and so on. So that's at the very forefront. Uh, After the tunability and so on, the number of parameters that you could use, perhaps that will be important also in the not only the fact, because what's very challenging with vector database is the fact that it's not or search it's not opinionated. So even for me, for the clip model, which one will I use? For instance, I have absolutely no idea which one to use. There's nothing that tells you that this model with this number of parameters will be better than this one, and will it run correctly on CPU versus GPU? Until now, I could make everything run on CPUs, so that's good news. Because I don't have to index millions or billions of. Because often I see for vector database or such comparison benchmark for we have now a benchmark for 1 billion vectors. That's purely informative. Probably if you don't have so many vectors, a few thousand for a shop, for instance, you you can you can survive on CPU. That's interesting. I was not sure before. I was not sure before. In fact, I've already always read that you needed GPU somewhere. Without GPUs, you were almost dead. And in fact, it's not so bad. Of course, if you have a thousand of images to index with a clip model, it will take some time, but not no. A customer had 6,000 images, and I warned him it could be it could be slow. And in fact, he was surprised it was pretty fast. And I didn't have to tweak a bit the Weaviate Kubernetes YAML files to put the clip on GPU, for instance. So it worked as it. So I think that there were a lot of progress also in that area with makes in fact the models usable for small configuration of machines. And as an example, so if you use a Kubernetes cluster in autopilot mode, I'm using Google Cloud, it could be another one. It's really under I'd say $60 a month. And on my demos, I've pretty much everything in the Weaviate
Yep.
in the Weaviate tooling. So on it, I have a clip, several vectorizers, the API vectorizers like OpenAI, Koa, Palm2, and so on. Even the cross-encoder re-ranker, and I had no problem. So I don't say that I could sustain. I don't know. In fact, I could sustain 1,000 queries per second or 10,000. I don't know. But for, let's say, a demo and something pretty standard for business, small businesses, it's surprisingly cheap. The only part which is not cheap is installing it, because you need to hire someone. I doubt a shop owner will be able to install the Kubernetes cluster. It's not difficult, but you don't want to do it. So in that case, the best option is Weaviate cluster services, and this one is really cheap, as I've seen. But yes, it's not what I expected a few months ago. You can go for it, and it's even comparable to some hosting for Elasticsearch, or if you auto-host self-host your Weaviate. I did not until now. I didn't need GPUs or anything like that, or TPUs, or other exotic hardware.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess like kind of separating like coming back to the hardware topic, I think like how you mentioned, like wanting to benchmark and compare different embedding models, I think it's such an interesting emerging part of the kind of technology. It's obviously like, academic machine learning, people almost think of that like first thing is how are we going to test and compare the models. But like kind of like I used to I like this idea a lot of large language models generate synthetic queries, and that gives you a data set to compare models with like NDCG scores and recall, all that kind of stuff. I'm starting to also like the idea of like cluster visualization, like where you use something like Nomic Atlas to like visualize your embedding space, and then you can look at the embedding spaces of two models, and you can see the like topic labels and say like, okay, I think this one is organizing the space better than the other one. But it is so interesting, and it's so interesting hearing you as a Weaviate user say that this is where you think the product needs to evolve into to kind of complete the search engine tooling. But yeah, so so then into the hardware kind of topic,
it's hardware, and
yes.
it's workflow. Hardware, I think it could be survivable, but the workflow is pretty complex. So if we're talking, yes, the idea would be that we would like to fine tune that. Ideally, we would like to have our model fully adapted, even at if possible, even at the vocabulary level. Let's say I'm a pharmaceutical shop selling drugs, and I have some pretty specific vocabulary. I'm not sure if you use a large language model which has not been tuned on, you will be able to raise anything. The BM25 will be fine, except if you're searching by formulas. I guess then you can't. I mean, really symbolic, like equations or things like that. But BM25 would be very good, I think, in that case, because the more specific the vocabulary, the better it is. So there you need to train it. But as you said, there are plenty of ways, but two ideas of training. One is it does manage by itself. You have a workflow, you have a website, you click on a button, and somehow, again, the idea of magic, it auto trains and so on. And it's
Mhm.
10
Right.
euros, 10 euros at the end, and your model is trained. The problem is that it's difficult because you don't have the benchmarks. How will you evaluate that you've produced something interesting? That's we'll talk about T5 and so on, for instance. And the other way is you mentioned being able to see the vectors, clusters, and so on, but that requires expertise. That requires you have an internal team or consultants, and it's a bit the same thing as for Elasticsearch or Solr. You have consultants which are here to evaluate. Do you need synonyms, for instance? Okay, you will evaluate your vocabulary, and you'll see, okay, there's a cluster here around fish. I would like to have a little bit 10,000 Latin name for fishes here around that. And there you have to produce them. So fortunately, you have a consultant who has this in a file. So with the vectors, that's pretty similar. In fact, it's another tooling, it's another competence, but you have to cluster, in fact, your data. But that requires money and time, and so that's a solution for me, as I understand, for more high-end or top of the mid-market. The solution I can foresee is the one you mentioned. That means synthetic queries. So the idea, I've seen it several times in papers. That's so interesting that I tried to imagine the workflow. So the idea is how do you benchmark something when you don't have benchmarks, in fact? So you have to produce your benchmark. What do you have currently? You have your shop with, let's say, 100,000 products, but you don't have the queries. Or if you have the queries, perhaps they are not so good because they come from the analytics, and we know there are biases. With that, you will see only the head queries and not the tail queries, for instance.
Oh yeah.
So we would like, because it's a learning to rank problem, it's very standard in the search, but you need to produce triplets of query, product. So it can be title, description, attribute, but product, and positive and negative, for instance. But how to do that without the biases of user events, user signals? And the idea was, as you mentioned, let's make a generative AI model, generate the queries from my documents. So from my products, let's say I take the titles if they are important, and I have a title about fishes again, and I ask a T5 model or other models to generate one or several queries for me, and then I use vector search to find among these answers which are the best. So I take the 10 queries, for instance, and query 1, does it return what I want? Query 2, and so on. And let's say the 2 or 3 first are positive and the other ones are negative. And then I train a cross encoder with all these triplets. And I use a Weaviate ranker on my train encoder, and that's it. But it's probably the problem will not be the hardware in that case. It will be the workflow, in fact. As I said, for small business or let's say WordPress, you don't have fancy hardware at disposition and so on. So you will probably to have somehow a cluster. So perhaps you can reuse. Okay, I'm a bit cheating because in fact, yes, you already have a cluster because you need Weaviate. So let's say if you don't use Weaviate hosted services, you already have a cluster, so perhaps you can use this cluster to install your training and with tools like Vertex AI, for instance, or I don't know, or Hugging Face Auto, not know, Hugging Face Auto ML and auto training, things are similar, and that would be incredible because imagining that you have a big LLM that a cross encoder that will be trained from your data and re-injected automatically and for 10 euros. That's what I'm not sure is if it's really worth it in terms of quality. Apparently, I've seen some benchmark. It was pretty good, but is it better really than BM25 if your vocabulary is very dedicated? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think, if BM25 is always your baseline, kind of like what you said, your example of something to sleep on, right? Like that's just it kills that. I mean, I know, when we previously talked, you mentioned how a lot of Amazon products, they might have like sleep in the title because of how much.
Yeah. Yes, because indeed, we talked about that. Amazon released a few months ago. Yes, I think it's Amazon. A lot of data about queries plus results, and results are titles, if I remember, with a notation positive, negative, and it appears that that was analyzed. I remember now that was analyzed in the meta rank paper, and they found that if you look at the titles, they have been optimized. It's so that there's so much competition at Amazon that the titles have been optimized so that the, all the product description attributes and all the products in the title, the ones which are important. So if you know that your fish, people are mostly buying fresh fish, you will put fresh fish in your title and not just fish. And that could explain why perhaps BM25 is so good, because if everything is pre-done, in fact, for BM25, adapted to BM25, but as soon as you imagine that you have synonyms and so on, and you have a data model, a model that has been trained on that kind of thing, it's difficult to say. So that's an interesting idea, the fact that Weaviate, perhaps not itself, but the ecosystem of Weaviate could be recursive and be used to retrieve the relevant documents from the generated queries, and that is reinjected in the B encoder, and the B encoder is used in Weaviate. I don't know if Weaviate has some ideas about that, but that could be interesting, because
Yeah.
I'm sure that what Weaviate is currently releasing, like re-ranking, generative, and so on, was not in the plans even 1 year ago, because it didn't. Because LLMs were not a commodity at that time. So perhaps these kind of things, auto training and auto fine tuning and so on. I agree. The problem is that there's not a single method to do it, and tomorrow there will be perhaps a better way to do it. It will be done in the model itself, or perhaps there will be a million models pre-trained available, so you don't have to do it. There will be probably models pre-trained on fishes, so you don't have to do it yourself, and so on.
Yeah, I guess three things out of that. I mean, like, I'm gonna come back to stay on the fine tuning, but quickly, like building on, you mentioned that Amazon people optimize these titles really interestingly. I just want to share a quick nugget that Madhav from Shopify, when he presented at ODSC in Boston, he told me about how they use generative models to help people write titles for their Shopify products. So, like, a lot of Shopify is just like everyone across the world selling
Yeah.
their stuff, and they don't think to write their titles like this. So this is that generative feedback loop thing that we talk about. And like once once LLMs, the inference becomes so cheap, I think it can't be, it's going to be exciting how much LLMs can like augment title descriptions, right? Like just the explosion of content in the miscellaneous ways that takes shape.
And in this example, do you remember if was it mentioned if it was more for SEO, and that means for attracting new visitors, or more for CTR CRT conversion rate? That means, is there some user signals inside or not? Because if you generate a perfect SEO title could be a perfect loser in terms of conversion. So if you because to attract visitors, generally you have to be really on the marketing side. You have to emphasize and sometimes exaggerate features. But when you want to sell it, so the visitor is there on your site and he has to buy it. If the product is not really like in the description described in the title, or just the vendor can't accept any title because he has to provide something which is closed, so can't accept anything. So does Shopify introduce some kind of signal in the training, for instance, of the models? And
I don't know details like that myself, but yeah, I just know that high level nugget. Like it was more, like, so yeah, I don't have too many of the details of exactly, just like something I heard in conversation that is just like related to our topic of like optimize these titles. And yeah, but yeah, what you mentioned about using the CTR and all that could be really, it's kind of like the whole instruction tuning, and then like the idea that like right now we're tuning these language models with just this insanely broad, did you like this, did you not like this, but you can fine tune language models with like any, like, I think the thing about it is any kind of what we used to call supervised, like how we used to think about supervised learning loss functions, all of that can just be applied to the end. And it's sequence to sequence with like, even though it's reinforcement learning, it's still kind of the same. You don't like supervise every step of the generation, but you could optimize LLMs to do CTR. It's just the optimization completely makes sense. And yeah, so but the other topic about about like training embedding models and ranking models with just a single click, where you spend $10 and now you have a new model. I think it's just like one of the most fascinating things about technology companies is like this: what do you build versus who do you partner with? And I think all of that it's just like incredibly unclear to me, at least. Like, I know obviously Bob probably has like a better sense of that than I do, but like this kind of thing of like, okay, are we a model training company now? And like, do we then split our attention between like the vector index, the database scaling, and and integrating search APIs, to now also thinking about like, how do we optimize model training workflows? And it's like, I kind of feel like there are so many parts of this like ML ops picture that I think there's a lot to be said to the value of companies focusing on particular things, but then like what things merge together over time is like, it's so confusing.
you have to be opinionated. So there are on the market some closed search solutions for shopping, with sometimes with plugins for WooCommerce, for instance, which have this kind of loop, in fact. But they have this kind of loop because they have chosen and trained one model, in fact. So if the customer wants something else, or if it doesn't fit really, or perhaps there's a kind of mismatch between his vocabulary, the content of his site, and their models, what happened in that case? And it's usually it can be pretty expensive, but which can be explained too, because if you have to train but we see in terms of search now, we see a convergence that's clear, a convergence between search, personalized search, and recommendations. The three now, the three are linked forever, I guess. And so we've seen with Elasticsearch, we've seen training on learn to rank. There are some extensions that enable to introduce signals in the models. You have re-rankers, external or internal. There are internal re-ranker in Elasticsearch with some plugins. MetaRank is an example. Okay, you get your results and then you send it to an external system to re-rank with a model which is costly, so you don't want to use it in phase one. So that's really, and it's not only for recommendation, it's for, if we imagine a site like Amazon, it's clear you need to have a good search. You need to have no result. That means you always have to produce something. Perfect for vector search. It's almost impossible to have nothing with a vector search. If you have a big catalog, you always have something. But you have to have personalized results. So I've bought that, so I'm probably more interesting in that that cluster of vectors than this one. And you have recommendations which are not related to your search. It's just on the bottom, on the right. Okay, you could have that too, and the three are definitely linked today. And vector search is finally, in fact, is a part of that. It's a content. But there's plenty of signals arriving. The problem for me, again, for more than 2 years, I have this idea to introduce personalization and recommendation in WPSolr. The problem is that you need signals. And if I remember, for certain providers of recommendation engine and so on, sometimes you need, for one, for instance, you needed 2 million events in the last 3 months, which is absolutely ridiculous for a small business that it will not have that in 10 years. And that's probably the limits of these systems. It's the market. Is it really? That's why I've not done it, because I made prototypes and so on, but finally, are these recommenders effective for a small website, in fact? Do you need 100,000, tens of thousands, and of signals to use it? And a search engine recently announced vector search. I went to their site and I read the documentation. And in fact, to have the vector search, you needed to send user events. That means either you have keywords allowed, either you have vector search, but you need to introduce, because probably that's this merging for recommendation, for personalization, you need to have events. And finally, in fact, you are using vector search to have a better content, yes, better vectors, but you have to fine-tune them with your events. So some have already chosen to merge everything, and some are not even delivering. In fact, are not even delivering vector search without the event. And another example was that you could provide the three, so vector search, recommendation, and personalization. But some features are not available if you don't send user events. For instance, the subjections, you're starting to type something and you want a list of keywords similar. You can't have them. I don't know why. You can't have them if you don't send the user events. So that's a feature, for instance, probably that will never be in the WPSolr, because there's too many events that are required to do that. And in that two cases, it's a bit strange for me to understand why vector search is so merged with events that, in fact, you can't produce one without the other.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think, well, I do think with the zero shot model, like I also used to think this way, that I couldn't imagine like having a vector, like a latent space in a deep learning model without some kind of training on your data. But now clearly the zero shot models from like OpenAI, Cohere, they clearly get you like some of the way there. But the question, I mean, closing the loop with the fine tuning, yeah, it does all sound so interesting, and it's definitely interesting to see how the how the whole market of all this is shaping out further. Well, yeah. Awesome. Patrice, I think this was a really great coverage of all these search engine topics, and just understanding what you're building, the nuances of, just getting into the details of hosting it in cloud services and Kubernetes and all this cool stuff. And then, your perspectives on search engines and how the market's evolving is just gold. I think this is, expert level insight of someone who is like, on the front lines of building it. And so, yeah, thank you so much for joining the podcast, and thank you so much for sharing all this information.
Thank you for hosting me. And see you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for listening.
Bye.